What's up, everybody? I am back. Monday's always a tough day, man. I'm working hard on the MMT Trader Report. I work all weekend. Start doing it really like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. A lot goes in there, 19 pages. Anyway, the report is out. So those of you who are on that email list, you received it. If you want to get a copy of it, plus all the back issues, go to pitbulleconomics.com and click on the tab that says products. And you can get your 30-day free trial. And then you can download or you can check out all the back issues. It's going to be almost a year that I've been putting that out. I think March 28th was the first issue. So we still got a little bit of time. Anyway, what do I want to talk about? What do I want to talk about today? I want to talk about the fact that somebody asked me a question here, or made a comment, actually. They're like, hey, Norman, you said that fiscal flows are slowing down, and you said that bank credit is slowing down, so how that beep, is there going to be inflation? By the way, the fiscal flows are now picking up. They are now positive year over year, and I suspect that's going to remain that way. All right, and I talk about that in the MMT Trader Report. As far as the bank credit stuff, we'll have to see. There was a little bit of a pause last week in the steep slowdown that we have seen over the last 3 or 4 weeks. More than that, really. I mean, that slowdown started back at the end of September. There was a pause in that. But we'll have to see how that plays out. You know, those two things are interrelated. When you talk about fiscal flows, right? Fiscal flows flow to the income and savings of the non-government, and income is a very important factor in getting bank credit, right? You have to, borrowers have to have the income to be able to pay the loans back. So those things are linked. Anyway, on to that comment when the guy said, well, how's there going to be inflation if, let's assume still that the fiscal flows are slowing down, contracting year over year, and that bank credit is slowing down. How's there going to be inflation? Inflation is a price, okay? And when you have a monopolist, a price setter that's putting the price up, there's two ways you could have inflation. You could restrict supply, as in the case, what happened, right? We all, when we hear stories about Zimbabwe or the Weimar Republic, inflation, hyperinflation, what happened? Their economies were basically destroyed. The means of production were destroyed. It wasn't so much that they were printing money and then things became overinflated, is that they didn't have the stuff. They didn't have the stuff. Or they had, in the case of Germany after World War I, they had reparations which they had to pay in foreign currency, in sterling. They didn't have it. And also, France occupied most of the Ruhr Valley, that was the industrial heartland of Germany, so they couldn't produce anything. So there was nothing. So the money went for scarcity, and that scarcity created the inflation. It wasn't that the money created the inflation, it was the scarcity that caused the constant printing for more and more money, because one item, something very simple, a piece of bread, basic things were impossible to find no matter what the cost was. Anyway, getting a little bit off track here. It's price setting. So in other words, when the central bank, which is the federal government's banker, sets the prices higher and higher through higher interest rates, and the cost of credit is reflected in the cost of all goods and services. When the cost of credit goes up, the cost of production is raised, across the board, and that affects the price of everything. So you have price setting in that instance. How do you get stagflation? Static output, higher prices. How do the higher prices result? They result in some form of price setting. Now, in the 1970s, we had three things going on. We had two oil embargoes, which were very, very important in the inflation of that period. We had price setting by the central bank, which thought it was combating inflation by raising interest rates, when in fact it was raising the level of prices on top of what we saw with the oil embargo. And we had that wage push inflation, where, you know, the wages were going up. You had much stronger unionization in the United States at that time, and contracts, new contracts, always had built-in cost of living increases. You had that driving it as well. All right. So the answer is, it could be in two forms. A monopolist, which the government is because it issues its own currency, a monopolist can set the price, right, by various means, but what we're seeing here is by the Fed raising interest rates. Okay. A monopolist, as in the case of an oil producer, let's talk about Saudi Arabia, they could curtail production, which results in a price wherever that might be, wherever that equilibrium price might be, or they could simply set the price and then allow their output to adjust. Okay, that's what the Fed does, right? How does the Fed put rates where it wants to? It states a rate. It says, okay, now the rate's going to be whatever, 75 basis points. You know, in the past, it used to adjust reserve balances to sustain that rate. It doesn't really even have to do that now. I mean, because it pays the rate. So no bank is going to lend below. That's the floor, right? If the Fed says the rate is 75 basis points, boom, that's the rate. No bank is going to lend Fed funds at 50 basis points because the Fed's paying them 75. All right? That's why they're going to lend at 50. It's stupid. That's like taxing themselves. So that's how you would get inflation in an environment where not necessarily you have the fiscal flows very strong or you have lending very strong. Now understand one thing here, because we always hear this, right? That inflation, this was a term coined by Milton Friedman back in the day. Inflation is always a monetary phenomenon. That's, you know, one thing I got to say about Uncle Milty. He was a great marketing genius. Back in the 70s, he sold everybody on that whole, you know, manage the money supply. At the end of his life, he even said, now, you know, I don't rely so much, I don't believe so much in that stuff that I used to talk about, you know, early on in my career, that you could manage the economy with the money supply growth and all that crap. I mean, the Fed can't even control the money supply. Can't even control the money supply. I know for many of you that's going to be blasphemy to your ears. It can't control the money supply. It could try to influence. What is the money supply? Really, we're really talking about bank credit, right? I mean, normally that's 90% of all what we call money. It's less now because the Fed, you know, pumped a lot of reserves. But we saw the reserves, when that reserves went from nothing practically to almost $3 trillion, didn't do much for lending, okay? Loan growth was slow. So it tries to influence by adjusting the interest rate, but it can't. It can't. So there you have it. So that's how you can get inflation when those other things are maybe not kicking in. It's price setting. Price setting. Same thing with exchange rates, which I've spoken about in the past, or I will speak about here. All right? See you later. Bye-bye.